Real Astrology with Matthew Deagle. I'm your host, Matthew Deagle. Today here I have a guest, Michael Horn. Michael Horn is the authorized American media representative for the Billy Meier extraterrestrial contact case, which he has researched since 1979. He is the producer and director of the new Billy Meier documentary, which you can buy on his website, theyfly.com, which is called The Spiritual Teaching in Everyday Life. He's also the director of the award-winning film And Did They Listen? It's probably the best documentary out there on the Billy Meier case. And he's also just a general all-around talented guy, musician. You can buy his albums as well, I believe, from his website. Michael, welcome on the show.
Thanks, Matthew. Nice to be back. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I appreciate having you on here. And per Michael's proposal, generally we're going to have him on as a regular guest on Fridays. And the idea is that we're going to have callers or people contact me on my website, MatthewDeagle.com. That's MatthewDeagle.com. And if you have any particular questions about the Billy Meier case, about the spirit teaching, about prophecies, anything, you can go to my website and there's a contact form there. Contact me via email, and then we can answer your questions on the air the next Friday. Already yesterday, I, however, had a guest, or had a caller come in named Sheila. If you're listening there, she asked a question about a temple of Baal, which is being built in New York. I had a little look into this. I didn't look very deeply, but in general, it appears this is just another example of atheist trolls trying to provoke people. My general recommendation with this sort of thing is just don't feed it. Kind of a behavioral psychology approach. Just extinguish it by not giving it attention, because this sort of thing is just a distraction from the much worse evil lying hidden within the mainstream religions. For instance, many of the symbols of the Catholic Church, many of the doctrines, even the open symbols of the religions often have a negative meaning, or the names that they attribute to the gods, negative meanings, which open up the doorway for collective subconscious negative forces, which are just as negative, if not worse, than the ancient god Baal. Generally, you have to see the truth is like a mathematical formula, and that which does not agree with the formula, which is not logical, is the anti-logos, or a false illogic trying to infiltrate logic. Generally, I think with these, like the Satanic Temple they're trying to build in Oklahoma, or the statue they want to have there at the courthouse, all this sort of thing, to me, seems to be the work of immature, rebellious characters that should just be ignored, because they just want the attention. You know, they're just wannabe Marilyn Mansons or something. You know, you don't want to give them attention. Yes, it might be offensive, but the idea is just control your feelings and just ignore it. And it will probably go away if they don't get the attention they want. Obviously, they're trying to get attention. They recently had a prayer in some game as well. Also, keep in mind that in the original story of Elijah, the Baal priests were not just erecting a statue, right? They were actually sacrificing infants, etc., which is why the prophet Elijah, or Eliah, is described in what's now the Book of Kings, a very brief abridgment of the original book of Elijah, as having several of them killed, again, to defend human life. Also, some people I've noticed mischaracterize the Baalists as pantheists. They actually weren't pantheists, and they weren't like New Agers or something. The Baalists were worshipping what would be called by Muhammad a jinni, or a negative collective delusion from the collective subconscious. Just as, unfortunately, many Christians, Muslims, and Jews do today, especially as observable in the extremist Islamists like ISIS, who are, you might say, demon-possessed, because they are possessed by negative thought form, which wants to destroy anything which it's in competition with, a kind of meme from hell. Also, another thing to mention is that I've discussed, in general, you have to understand things in terms of logic and reality. So if something is not logical, don't believe it. There are logical teachings in there, interspersed with all the false teachings. But the false teachings are there to poison you, to kind of piggyback on the truth. Thankfully now we have the original and pure truth through Billy Meyer, whose books are increasingly being translated into English. Right now I'm working on a translation for Michael of a book consisting of several questions that he fielded to Billy, and Billy then answered these in German, so I'm going to have to translate these from German to English. Michael, any comments on the matter?
That's one of the more valuable things that's being done, and I just really want to acknowledge your contribution to this and how thoroughly and quickly you're working with it, because the more material that can be translated as accurately as is possible, the better it is for people to be able to read what Meyer's written, what he's brought forward again. And, Matthew, I think this is a good opportunity, in addition to, being happy about you're making this possible and contributing, and you and a team of people that are doing this. A lot of people don't understand and don't know something that Meyer actually, between 20 and 40 years ago, I'm waiting for the actual date from Switzerland, from Christian Frenner, but Meyer made something clear that people don't understand, and that is that he, and I've said this for a long time, he once again brings forward the original spiritual teaching of creation. And that also means that, as he has said, sometimes he is not even the author himself of the material, because it is the spiritual teaching. Now this, people might scratch their heads with a little bit, well, what's the difference and all that stuff. This is going to be something explained a little more, at least more frequently, and hopefully better as time goes on, because it's going to clarify for a lot of people. People say, "Oh, well, Meyer got this from somebody else's material, or someone else wrote a similar thing." And it's just the same with prophecies and predictions and inventions. And that is that with certain things, they appear through multiple people, in various times. Inventions, as we know, can sometimes be attributed to, or at least said to have occurred with 2 or 3 different people in the world coming up with the same thing at various times. So we want to understand that Meyer has a very unique role. As he describes, he is able to, using his spiritual and consciousness-related abilities, go into what's called the storage banks. Now, I'll pause here and say that all of this, I have to say, admittedly, this we will consider speculative, because we don't know about proving the existence of something called the storage banks or Meyer's ability to access information from it. But that being said, let me fill it out. He claims that he has the ability, through spiritual and consciousness-related abilities, powers, to penetrate into the storage banks where virtually everything that's ever been said, written, thought, felt, acted upon is stored, but especially go to where the spiritual teaching of this creation, this universe, is contained as it exists, and to transcribe it for us. He's done this in a book called The Goblet of Truth, where the 6 previous prophets, meaning Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, Muhammad, all who bore basically the same spirit forms, the evolving spirit that Billy Edward Albert Meyer is enlivened by in this lifetime, all of their presentation of the same spiritual teaching that is contained and stored in this reservoir, and Meyer went in and transcribed, brought it forward for the book, The Goblet of Truth. And in this way, he will bring forward teaching and does not claim to be the author of it. However, he is also able, fully able, as a teacher and a true prophet, to write spiritual teaching, to calculate things that are prophetic and predictive in nature himself. And he clearly states that there is a difference between his own ability to do that and the relative infrequency of his doing it, and that which is already contained in the storage bank. So it's a bit of a lengthy, attempt to explain as best I could what is stated in the case.
Yeah, the storage banks is what you would normally call, or at least usually traditionally it's called the Akashic records, right? That's in fact the word he used to use as well, as the Akasha Chronik or Akashic records. He chose the word storage bank because it's less associated with the Hindu religion and less with all these other false explanations that are contained in the Sanskrit writings. But it's the same thing, right? Basically, fundamentally what the Akashic record is based on is this reality of the storage banks. And, actually, I think it is something you can observe yourself, because as Michael said, when an artist or musician gets inspiration, where do you think that comes from? It comes from the collective subconscious, from the storage banks, and from spiritual impulses. Even the crop circles of such bizarre and geometric forms that some people think aliens must be responsible, the Plejaren explain these are actually created by artists under the influence of astrological creative impulses from outer space.
Yeah, I don't know if they had used the word astrological in the explanation. They may have, but they talk about it being the creation itself, which can and does produce the impulses and creative stuff that's flowing and swinging waves and what have you, and that people thereby are picking up on, as you say, and they are then translating.
Well, I'm just using the term astrological because that's basically, well, if you have an impulse coming from outer space that influences the mind, that's pretty much astrology right there, right? But
perhaps astronomical, astrological, but they are making clear that I think that this is transmitted through the swinging waves of the creation as such, and if that also has something to do, with the then that would be, I imagine. Yeah,
something else to keep in mind here is that the subconscious is about twice as intelligent as the conscious mind, according to Billy as well. About twice. I think he says this in the book, The Psyche. And as a result, the subconscious is capable of creating forms that are beyond the intelligence and ability of the conscious. So when you see something that's supposedly miraculous, generally it's not really a miracle per se. It's just something you don't understand because your subconscious is smarter than you. And so it's able to produce something that you don't understand. But it actually comes from your own subconscious. That's how brilliant pieces of art and music are made, out of pure inspiration. Because that inspiration comes from the subconscious. Now, that being so, knowing that we can observe in our everyday life that this kind of higher intelligence exists in our own subconscious, then we just have to carry that out in logic, or follow it logically to the fact that then that's part of a collective, and people do in fact get the same inspiration at the same time all around the world. This happens pretty often scientifically, artistically. Then you pretty much have right there evidence of the storage banks.
Right.
Now, as far as Billy's books, yes, the Goblet of Truth, Om, etc., are actually the works of previous figures, such as Muhammad and Enoch and so forth. But it's important to recognize here that virtually any form of these books that you're going to get from somewhere else has been falsified or watered down. That's the case with books on the might of thoughts, such as there's an example of one that's superficially similar to Billy's, but not nearly as detailed or logical. There's an example of one which is, of course, then also the Book of Enoch has been falsified, so that there are different versions of it. In Ethiopia, they have ridiculous additions, like that the giants were 300 ells tall and not just 30 ells tall in one version. Right. The Bible as well. The Bible is not the Word of God. The logic of the universe is the Word of God, or creation. The Bible is just a book compiled by a bunch of rabbis hundreds of years after the events occurred. They essentially just took various different traditional stories, both oral and written, and then abridged them and compiled them. That's why I say, like, the book of Elijah, right? I actually use that term because there was a book of Elijah written by the actual prophet Elijah. But that itself was only in little bits and pieces, which were then brought together by later spirit teaching followers, who then, or successors, and then that was even worse falsified and abridged. It's the same thing happened with all the prophets. Muhammad's teaching wasn't actually compiled into a book until about 100 years after his death by a caliph named Abdul Malik, and then edited in Iraq. So it's important to realize that although you'll see similarities in some elements of the truth in all sorts of religious texts and even New Age texts, like 1844 and all these people being prophets, etc., like the Baha'i faith talks about that, for example. But there's also dangerous falsehoods that have been incorporated into the Baha'i faith from other religions on which it's based, such as Islam, etc., Shiism, right? Because the influence of these religions is so powerful that even smart people on this planet are often beguiled by them and accidentally incorporate these heresies into their teachings. That's the main cause, I think. Even if they are in contact with some kind of subconscious impulse. Because the subconscious can also give you false intuitions, right? The storage banks are accessed through a purely meditative state of mind where there's no opportunity for falsehood because it's from a spiritual reality where no falsehood can exist. But your material consciousness can easily deceive itself. And that's actually what a lot of this sort of belief is based on. You attribute the powers of your own consciousness to angels or demons or other things that don't exist, or that are deeply misunderstood, at least. It's important to realize, as far as the storage banks, I mean, I'm translating a part here. I just translated a part of this book, this Questions to Billy book that Michael Horn was involved in. And he says that, all right, to give you an idea of how eloquently Billy speaks, and I mean, I had to translate this exactly, word for word from his German. I mean, his German is the most cultivated, most eloquent that I've read, pretty much. And it's very detailed and technical, but part of the reason why, when you read these translations, they're so technical and detailed and wordy is because they're precise. There's not too many words or too few words. There's just enough to stimulate you to think, and he wants you to read and reread passages. He doesn't want it to be paraphrased. I talked to Mariana in Switzerland about this. They want it to be as close to the German as possible, so that when you read it, it's supposed to be a little awkward to you. It's supposed to be a little bit difficult to understand at first, so that then you think deeply about the whole thing and don't just race through it. But to give you an example, he says that, all right, let's see what the beginning of this answer is here. He goes into a detailed explanation about the reincarnation of the spirit form, and distinguishes this from a human being. Now, human beings, according to him, do not reincarnate, but spirit forms do. The essence of the human being reincarnates. The question, interestingly enough, this gives you an idea of how interesting this information is too, because he's going to give you detailed information about topics which are not discussed at all, because some of these topics are, at the moment, only even partly understood in secret organizations in places like India or the Sufis, etc. But he explains everything in modern terminology clearly. The question for Michael was, on and from what part of the consciousness do so-called powers, for example, telepathy, levitation, and so on, depend and manifest? Does the pineal gland play a role in this? And he says, before a more direct response can be given about telekinesis, telepathy, teleportation, and levitation, in order that the whole of this be better understood, first some introductory explanations are required in relation to what both the spirit, respectively, the spirit form, and the consciousness are. Only the right knowing of the facts can, as is ever the case, lead to the right understanding of the matter. As a result, technical and detailed explanations are essential. This is especially necessary given the fact that the human being of Earth has so often, and since time immemorial, utterly wrongly understood the whole of the truth regarding the spirit, respectively spirit form, and consciousness, and their specific activity, use, availability, the things they are responsible for, and their ability to manifest things. And this happens in such a wise that the energies and powers that fundamentally belong to the thoughts, feelings, and consciousness are falsely attributed to the spirit, respectively the spirit form. Thus, the following explanations are to be deeply paid attention to, so that thereby one comes to understand what function the consciousness and what function the spirit form of the human being has. The spirit is a creational energy with great power, by which the human being, like every life form, is animated. The spirit is also called spirit form and is directly connected to the creation that is universal consciousness, and with its whole energy and power. The spirit, respectively the spirit form, is immortal, and thus is of permanence and continuation until at a far future time a remelding with the creation that is universal consciousness, respectively with the creation energy, takes place. Till then, the spirit, respectively the spirit form, is in a cycle of reincarnation, respectively rebirth, in which knowledge is collected and accumulated unto wisdom. In consequence of the inability of the human being in regard to a great many terms of understanding, such as consciousness, at the time of Emmanuel, the traditional and widespread term spirit was used instead of consciousness. So here's something important. I'm not going to go on and on because we're going to come up with a break here in a second. But he says that the term spirit was used by Emmanuel to mean consciousness, or by Jesus, in other words. But this is not the absolutely correct term. It's just that that's all that was available in the Aramaic vocabulary. So a lot of things are now misunderstood to be spiritual that are actually forces of consciousness or powers of consciousness. Now, again, if you want to check out Michael Horn's website, that's theyfly.com, theyfly.com. My website is matthewdeagle.com. You can ask questions about any specific interests in the spirit teaching, prophecies. There's massive amounts of information. We're going to be coming up with a break here in a second, but we'll be back after the break. Thanks for listening to Real Astrology. I guess the music isn't playing yet, but yeah, basically you want to. There's tons of information here, and I recommend studying it as soon as you can, because it's going to take you a lifetime to understand everything. Welcome back to Real Astrology with Matthew Deagle. I'm here with my guest, Michael Horn, who's the authorized American media representative for the Billy Meyer Extraterrestrial Contacts. Before the break, we were discussing how the real meat of this contact is not alien spaceships or information about the cosmos, but the spirit teaching, which is the same one that all of the religions are based on, all the truth of the religions. The falsehood came from heretics. And therefore, it doesn't matter what religion you believe in or belong to, this spirit teaching applies to you. And it is very important that people come to understand the actual truth and the truth of where we are headed if we do not change our behavior and thinking. Michael, do you have any comments to make?
No, I mean, that says it. You know, I think, Matthew, that it would be very interesting to find out what people in your audience think, what their perspectives, questions, and challenges are about all of this. Because also the Billy Meyer case, for those people that have heard about it, quite a few people have only, become familiar with the idea of the UFO photos, the physical evidence, and then, the controversy around it. A lot of people think, well, this is some kind of a terrible hoax or what have you, because there's been an awful lot of disinformation that has been crafted over the years. So to find out, know more about what and how your listeners think about the Meyer case, that would be something that would interest me quite a bit. Recently, just to diverge a little bit, two of my blogs focused on kind of challenging some people that are out there in the world in some ways. There's a radio talk show host named Dave Hodges, and he had published information about forthcoming Russian attacks, for instance. That was one of the main things. He's also written about the coming U.S. Civil War or wars. And I deliberately, actually 2.5 years ago, I sent him links to Meyer's information foretelling all of this in a document that's called the Henoch Prophecies, one of the really, really interesting bodies of information.
Yeah, and what do you know? Now the guy has the information on his website, but he's not attributing it to its source.
Well, wait, here's the other shoe that I want to drop. I provoked him by sending, by blogging and pointing out that I had sent him Meyer's information a couple of years ago. Now, he was deriving his information, he claims, from some other sources, and some critics of the Meyer case have pointed out that there's a guy who lived, I think, in the 1800s, Johansson or something. I'm sorry, Alfred something or other, and I should have it in front of me, but I don't. And he had, predicted a lot of the same stuff about Russia that's in the Enoch prophecies. And,
well, I mean, the thing to understand is that Enoch lived 9,000 years BC, right? So, I mean, well, his prophecies have been around for a long time in occult circles, and so it's a very bad idea to trust a source just because they have the real prophecies if they don't have the full teaching like Billy does, because because these occult organizations are out there to cover up the truth, basically.
Well, what my other point had been that, as Meyer himself said, this information is stored in the storage banks.
Well, that's true as well, right? So people can come up with the same impulses and inspirations. Not to mention, for a long time, the extraterrestrials were actually giving impulses to the subconscious minds of scientists, thousands of scientists for scientific developments, and many other people. Without their knowledge, this information would come out of their subconscious. It was ultimately from impulses given to them by the extraterrestrials.
Or that were able to generally unconsciously tap into in the storage banks themselves.
Yes, by the way, in terms of callers, I forgot to mention the number to call in is 844-769-2944. So if anybody has any questions, they can also call in on the air. Ideally, in order to give a detailed answer, we want to have the questions sent to me on my contact form on MatthewDeagle.com, and then we can prepare an answer, a good answer for you on the next Friday's program.
Well, I would suggest two things. One, that you repeat that number for your listeners, and two, just for my own, position about answering questions, I like to just get hit with questions too in the moment, because I like to find out if I can source the answer from the material I'm familiar with, or if people, raise questions or challenges that, require a more spontaneous, in the moment kind of response.
All right, so the number is 844-769-2944, and it's a toll-free number, 844-769-2944. That's
good. I like that. You did it like one of those radio guys or TV.
Well, I guess I am one of those radio guys now.
I know. That's great. Well, let's go back for a moment, if we can, to the Dave Hodges thing. So he got, very steamed at my blog about this. People can read the blog up there on, theyflyblog.com. And he sent me like an email threatening to sue me. So, and claiming that he's been doing this long before any Billy Meyer and alien abduction. I mean, the guy...
Look, he would lose a lawsuit because he clearly plagiarized. I mean, yes, there are people who can draw from the storage banks, but they're pretty few and far between, Well, not everybody's a meditative master or a master artist.
But I think I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on something, because he said, well, I have these other sources. I think that he could be, telling the truth, that other people came up with the information either through Meyer or
somebody else plagiarized Meyer, probably, or that's more likely. I mean, this information is not widely available. Even those prophecies from that correspond in some ways with Billy's prophecies from the 19th century, they're much vaguer. They're not nearly as detailed. All these, look, the fact is, there's a massive campaign to cover up Billy Meyer. People are apparently being paid to do it by somebody. They're going around just making up lie after lie in order to try to get you to ignore. It's easier to do in the English-speaking world than in German, because if you read German, you can pick up his books and read thousands and thousands of pages of detailed information about scientific facts that weren't known at the time, detailed information about consciousness, psychology, politics, predictions of events that didn't happen yet. Like in 1987, they predicted the World Trade Center attack. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Bill, you've been following this since 1979, Michael, so you've seen all these predictions and prophecies coming true. And you know just how ridiculous doubters of Billy Meyer are, how absolutely baseless their accusations are.
Well, I want to bring up another point that, you see, the people that claim that Meyer, for instance, had plagiarized the Might of the Thoughts, and they say it was based on a book from early 1900s, 1903, 1906, somewhere in there. by James Allen. So this is something that none of them thought about. And in my, I had another blog I just put up, basically criticizing ASU, Arizona State University, for not responding to my information to them about defamation from a student of theirs, Andy Vribicek. Here's my point. Vribicek and a guy named Mahesh have claimed that Meyer went and plagiarized, in some cases word for word, from James Allen's books, which preceded, Meyer's writing, certainly, 1903, let's say it was. Here's what they didn't take into consideration, and here's what I recently challenged Andy Vribicek to produce. I said, you are saying that The Might of the Thoughts is plagiarized from Allen's book. Allen's book that you show is in English.
Yeah, exactly. Billy Meyer can barely even speak English.
Right. So here, unless and until we can get to the German part, let's just stay with English for a moment. So what we have to first presume is that prior to writing The Might of the Thoughts, by at least a year or so, because we're talking basically really pre-digital publishing for the most part, but let's just say somewhere before the actual date that Meyer wrote Macht der Gedanken in German, he found or came upon or was given, bought or checked out in the library James Allen's book on As a Man Thinketh. So what we have to then imagine, presume, and of course substantiate, he found this book, let's say in English, and we can also then extend this to the German, but in English, because we're saying that he, plagiarized the English book, that he had some reason to get this book, and if he did obtain it, he then had to have it translated for him into German by somebody who would translate the 40-odd pages of whatever the book, and would remember doing it, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, because if you've ever seen Billy speak English, he only has like a conversational ability in English. He doesn't speak fluent English.
Yeah, I mean, he can converse, but much less over the years. When I go there, believe it or not, I have to speak to him in German, and I'm not a fluent German speaker. So I crank my brain to try to make myself understood. So here's what would have happened. He would have had to then have the book translated into German, sit down, and then write his own book in German, which expounds far beyond the material that Allen has in his book. And the skeptics also admit some of it's similar, some is exact, some is similar, some it conveys the same meaning. So we're not saying he went and directly plagiarized.
Well, the funniest thing about all this is the most ridiculous thing about all this is that, first of all, obviously Billy expounds on these things in knowledgeable, deep detail that a plagiarist would not be able to produce at all. Just because and not to mention, if you are discussing, listen to this, if you're discussing a real and true fact, chances are you're going to use the same words to describe the same reality. The truth doesn't change.
Right.
The truth stays the same forever.
Right.
So think of how illogical you would have to be to think that because somebody is telling the same truth that was true then, that they're a plagiarist. Am I supposed to make up a lie not to be a plagiarist now? That's absurd.
Sure.
I mean, but the fact of the matter is, these people are totally insane. These guys who go around attacking Billy, I don't know if it's just that they're insane or if they are being paid and they're professional liars. Probably a mixture of the two. But just ignore them. There's tons of stuff online trying to divert you from paying attention to the real meat of Billy's teaching, because I think the religions and their power structures are threatened by them. These heretical religions that are now destroying the planet, including Islamism, the Catholic Church with all of its materialism, etc., Judaism keeping its people separate and oppressed and and persecuted. Because remember that literally, the rabbis want Jews to be persecuted in order to maintain their solidity as an external society. Same thing, the Catholic Church wants its people to be naive and unaware of the truth and superficial. And it wants materialism too, because it wants material power. Islam does not want people to know the actual teaching of Muhammad and Emmanuel. At least not in general. Maybe some Muslims do, but the people in power, the imams, do not, because they want to remain the only mouthpiece of the so-called truth. They don't want the average Muslim to know the truth. And furthermore, these religions all keep the real teaching, the esoteric religion, secret. They believe it's for the clergy alone. The Roman Catholic Church has thousands of documents that they stole in their library under the Vatican, including the original Book of Enoch, the Sefer Yetzirah. All the books that are necessary to understanding the Bible are hidden away in foreign languages like Latin, Greek, and Hebrew and Aramaic, and they're only for the eyes of the elite. They are an evil organization, in other words, the dark side. They're like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars. They're not your friend. That doesn't mean that you should just go ahead and throw away your traditions and religion. It just means that you should not trust the hierarchy. If you believe in any religion, it's fine that you're from that culture. You just need to separate the wheat from the chaff. I don't believe that throwing the baby out with the bathwater and becoming an atheist is a good idea. But I also don't believe that maintaining falsehoods because they were fed to you by your evil masters is a good idea.
Well, the other thing, Matthew, is that, and this was actually presented by a guy who's an atheist. There's 2 points. One, he's a professor. This professor up at Oregon State, Peter Boghossian, said when you speak to people, he's a bit too much of a wanting to convert people to atheism. But he says, when you speak to people who are, heavily God-believing into the Bible, you should ask them that. Don't tell them they're wrong so much as ask them how they came to take on that belief system, number one. Number two, I think Sam Harris is the guy who said that when you refer to yourself as an atheist, it kind of sets up theism as some really dominant thing in a way that it'd be better if you're going to use the word theism and all to say you're non-theistic. Atheism isn't the only choice, as opposed to believing in religion. A spiritual and consciousness-related focus is what we're talking about with the spiritual teaching. The theism part really is it should be made small.
As we know from experience, a lot of these atheists are dead set against the truth. They don't want to accept, they have some kind of paranoid cowardice about even the notion that there's some kind of all-seeing eye watching them. Ironically, while a lot of them help the NSA build an all-seeing eye of surveillance on this planet, they're afraid of the idea of an all-loving creation watching them. But even though it's a fact, atheism is all illogical. When you get down to it, science wouldn't work if there weren't some kind of logical, immaterial structure behind the universe. You wouldn't have science if there weren't mathematics. And mathematics is not based on material evidence. It's not an atheistic phenomenon. It's a spiritual phenomenon. It's in the absolutum, right? It's simple logic. Atheists are not thinking logically. And I question they often have emotional reasons for being atheists. Like this Peter Boghossian or whatever, he's an Armenian. He obviously grew up in the Armenian Apostolic Church, like most Armenians. And so he has a kind of personal grievance with religion. Because Armenia is a very religious country, right, and a very religious culture. Right. But at the same time, in a way, look, he's not going the right path. Yes, there are things wrong with the Armenian Apostolic Church. There are things wrong with the Christian religion. But on the other hand, he's arguably betraying his own roots and his own culture by just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He's going against his own people instead of trying to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's the same thing with a lot of Jews who have now become Marxists and that sort of thing. Like, Judaism is full of dangerous heresies, and the rabbis really did want to enslave you and still do. But you don't have to follow the rabbis to just accept that there are good things in Jewish traditions. And those traditions, in some cases, are the only glue holding together these societies.
Yeah.
Because what truth there is in these religions and what positivity there is in the traditions is what gives a common bond among many people to a common past. Therefore, I am opposed to atheism as a movement, and I think that it's very childish and rebellious.
Well, you mentioned two things, about traditions and all, and the glue, and you also earlier mentioned the Baha'i faith. I am trying to remember if I mentioned on one of our chats that I know a group of people up here that are involved with the Baha'i faith where I live. And I go to, as a matter of fact, tonight they'll be having a meeting I may be going to. I go to some of their events because put it this way, at one of the events, I was talking to actually a Persian, Iranian Baha'i who was there to present something, and I said to him, I have absolutely no respect for any of your beliefs, and I hope you feel the same way about mine. I happen to like the values that I think the people in this community are living with: love, community support, family values, all this stuff, outreach to people without proselytizing. And therefore, I feel very comfortable hanging out with people who live those values. I may not care to participate in your, prayers and all this other stuff and all of that. Now, the funny thing is I happened to have, about a week ago, went to a little in-home meeting with some people who were Baha'i, and I've been interacting with these folks for about a year and a half. And they didn't know anything about me, really, what I'm into with the Meyer case. So somehow the opportunity came up, and I said, well, if you'd like to know, I'll tell you. And so I would say that they were, very curious and interested, but I think some circuits may have been fried, because I'm talking about Billy Meyer's prophetic accuracy in all these areas, and the Baha'i refer to the prophet, the Bab, and all this. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just another, it's another dead religion where all they can do is offer prayers and fancy words and talk about this guy as something.
Well, I mean, if you look into the history of it, the founders of Baha'i were Shiite Muslims, and so of course they're heavily influenced by religion.
Yeah.
No matter how much information they might have been able to get out of the storage banks or whatever. And there's also the possibility that they were contacted and falsified and influenced by the Giza intelligences, who were an evil group that were behind a lot of religions on this planet, or tried to falsify them. Well, it's important to realize, though, I think I've discussed this before, that there is a unity of truth among all human beings, and so it's important for us to know the truth for us to create peace. However, there's no unity of faith, because faith and belief are subjective. They're just arbitrary cultural beliefs, arbitrary cultural phenomena. For example, a Muslim might just be disgusted by the idea of eating a ham sandwich. An American enjoys it. Same thing with, however, an American might be disgusted by the idea of eating dog. Those are not actually truths. Those are just personal beliefs, or cultural in origin. On the other hand, the fact that there is one creation that has one set of logical laws that are behind the universe is an absolute truth, and anyone who doesn't recognize that is, in a sense, breaking away from the truth. Thankfully, the majority of religions throughout the world and cultures do teach, at least to some basic degree, this idea that there is a universal truth that we are all bound by. However, some people are breaking away from that entirely into a new way of thinking that disregards the truth entirely and sees man as some kind of God that can just ignore the laws of cause and effect. At least that's the materialistic trend in our society. So yeah, there's no unity of faith, there's unity of truth. If you want to find a common ground with somebody else, it has to be based on some truth that you both acknowledge that will not change.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned the Giza intelligences, and, when time permits, I'm sure we can go into that more, the Ba'ath race, look at the similarity in the word Ba'ath and Baha'i, and as someone in Figu said to me, well, of course, they were behind all religions, but especially think about this, and I think someone in the core group, I'm not sure, this was some years ago, said the Baha'i faith was, promoted by the Ba'ath as a one-world religion, which is what it is, to get everybody together, under the control of a one-world religion. I think it's possible. I'm not sure whether or not they would have tied that into the false second.
Yeah. Oh, I think, in my personal opinion, it's clear, because the Shiite Muslim lineages supposedly descended from Muhammad are actually descendants of Jews that converted to Islam in Afghanistan. And the Hebrews were, not just the Jews, right, but Hebrews, people descendants of the ancient Israelites, were the chosen agents of the Ba'ath. Because the prophets appeared in Israel, so they started with the Hebrews to falsify the teaching and to kind of twist it into an enslaving cult. So there's no doubt that this guy was contacted by the Giza intelligences. However, he probably had some genuine abilities and knowledge of his own, but he was misled. The Ba'ath were experts at misleading and poisoning the truth with falsehood. It is interesting to note, however, that a lot of people who are influential in UFO circles today, a lot of naive philanthropists and the like, who belong to the Baha'i faith, because just like Scientology, it targets the rich and the educated. Like, for instance, Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, who totally ignores Billy Meyer, but focuses on flashlights in the Arizona desert or whatever. I mean, it's foolishness. It's unfortunate, but of course there is it's not. You can't. Of course, it's based on traditions, and you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you want to use your reason. Always use your reason, and don't do something if it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So yeah, Stephen Greer stopped. You're not going to contact aliens by flashing flashlights in the desert. All right, thanks for listening to Real Astrology. Check out Michael Horn's website at theyfly.com, THEYFLY.com. Signing out.